Good morning, 3S. We are on to chapter 11 of The Boy Who Grew Dragons. So I haven't done this book with you yet, but I have been reading it myself and it is very good. Okay, the chapter is called Quiet Please, No Screaming. I knew if I was going to look after Flicker properly, I needed to know more about dragons and more about the dragon fruit tree. Once Mum and Dad were back and Grandad had left, I sat down at the laptop. Just to warn you here, computers and dragon poo really don't mix. I'd managed to clean the smelly stuff off before it ignited, but the heat must have fried the keyboard. I grimaced, closed the lid, and headed downstairs to use Dad's work computer. But I found him staring at a blank screen, muttering things that it was a good job Lolly wasn't near enough to hear. Thomas, Mum called, I'm just taking Charlotte to the library. We won't be long. Why don't you help your dad while we're gone? I looked at Dad's face, scrunched up in fury, and the screwdriver he was waving threateningly at the back of the laptop, and I backed away. Actually, Mum, I've got some homework I need to research. The library's just the place that I need to be. When she wasn't standing in our school playground at lunchtimes, Mrs. Olive also worked at the village library. She smiled as I walked in. Lovely to see you, Thomas, and your little friend, of course. For a second I thought she meant Flicker, and my hand shot to my hoodie pocket, but he was still hidden, curled up and fast asleep. Then I realised Mrs. Olive was smiling at Lolly, who was struggling her way out of the buggy. I smiled back, relieved. The village library is tiny, really, not like the big town library, but you can fill in these request forms and get books sent from any of the libraries in the area. Little bit of magic, Mrs. Olive always says. I can summon your book with just one click. I got the feeling Mrs. Olive liked the idea that the world was a little bit magic. Me one dagon, Lolly gabbled as she tottered in behind, her hands reaching for me. Mum looked completely frazzled, which I guess is what walking half a mile with a demanding 2-year-old does to you. What do you want now, Charlotte? Mum said, feebly dangling a series of half-chewed toys, a biscuit and a carton of juice in front of her. Lolly started pulling at my pocket, and I tried to push her hands away. Moana dagon, she insisted. I backed away, aware that both Mum and Mrs. Olive were staring at me now. Whatever it is, just give it to her, Mum pleaded, obviously fearing a Lolly meltdown. If I wasn't careful, this was not going to end well. I bent down to my little sister and whispered in her ear, Flicker's sleeping. It was enough to make her let go of my pocket, but I could feel Flicker stirring at all of the tugging, and when Lolly saw my pocket wiggle, she announced, Missing Lullaby Peas! Trying my best to smile sweetly at the adults, I took Lolly's hand and led her down to the far end of the library. Mrs. Olive's husband had made this kid-sized train that you could sit in, with carriages full of picture books and lovely cuddly toys. I settled Lolly on a cushion and lifted Flicker out of my pocket. He gave a little shudder and his scales rippled, but he still looked half asleep as he lowered his head and tucked in his wings. Lolly grinned and clapped her hands. Lolly-bee, lullaby, she giggled. Lolly, bye-bye. I put the little dragon on her lap and he curled up quite happily. She started humming and flicking through the pages of a book. A little ripple of turquoise flashed along Flicker's body from snout to tail. It was like a little contented purr, but in colour. He'd be asleep again in no time, so I left them to it. I had some serious research to do. Sadly, there was only one computer, and there was a sign on it saying that it was out of order. Mrs. Olive saw me staring at it. Oh, sorry, Thomas. There was a bit of an incident with a carton of juice just last story time. I expect you can find what you need in these, though. She swept her hand towards the shelves of books and she smiled. I nodded. It didn't take me that long. The mythology section had a whole shelf on dragons. I grabbed an armful of books and headed over to one of the comfy chairs opposite the library desk. Mrs. Olive had roped Mum into helping her sort some new books, and I watched as they disappeared into the stockroom. I gave a quick glance down the train where Lolly was babbling away, her hand pointing to the pictures in the book, as if she was telling herself, and Flicker, the story. Then I curled up in the chair and leafed through the first book. It was all about different types of dragon. I never knew that there were so many. Every country seemed to have its own particular type. Some were like snake-like with no wings, and others had 3 heads. In some places, they were seen as terrible fire-breathing monsters, while in others, they were actually believed to protect people. My head was so far away in those distant lands that I didn't notice what was happening down the far end of the library. At least, not until the screaming started. Okay, that's it for today. I will see you tomorrow.